Open up the door, it's Dave! Who?
Hey everyone, it's Dave, and welcome to another edition of Just What Do You Think You're Doing, Dave? On today's show, I wanted to talk about conspiracy theories. Now, conspiracy theories tend to latch onto one thing, one truth, if you will, and proceed to expand on that and remind you that everyone else is lying to you, that they're wrong in some way. These conspiracies are generally things that are on the fringes of believability, that the Earth is flat, that the moon landing was fake, and so on and so on. Things like that. But the key to them is that they can't be disproved. So they shift the burden of proof onto us, the non-believers. That's the challenge with all of this. But we should be smart enough to understand that this inability to disprove something doesn't make it true. That's not the way that proof works. My general advice to you is to always be a skeptic. Think carefully about what you hear, what you read. Does it make sense? A local radio host that used to be on the air used as his barometer, "I put it to my nose and it doesn't smell so rosy." I think that's a great synopsis of exactly what you should be doing. You kind of have to think about it as, does it smell right to you? Just take a moment and consider the source, the tone, and what they're telling you. The textbook definition suggests that conspiracy theories tend to include some or all of these triggers, that there's some sort of secret plan, that there's a cabal or some secret group behind it, that there's some kind of evidence supporting what they're saying. But typically the evidence that they're presenting to you is some form of disreputable source, or it's not science but kind of feels like it, or it's something that has nothing behind it. When you really look at it, you go, wait, that doesn't make sense. Sometimes you get this had to be on purpose. It was planned or staged or some sort of false flag or even a psyop type of thing they're doing. And often what follows is they're doing this because the world is good or bad, and this is in response to that. Or sometimes conspiracies just simply assign blame because you need a good enemy to make it work. To that point, I'd like to talk about one specific conspiracy theory, that aliens crash landed on the Earth and are being housed in Area 51 in New Mexico. So let's go back in history and understand what this is all about and how this became a conspiracy theory. It all started in 1947. We're in the summer, World War II is over, it's before Korea, and the Cold War is just getting started. There's some peace at the moment and no real enemies in the world. Something happens in New Mexico. Now, surely it was a UFO. By definition, it was something that was flying and was unidentified, and it had crashed. So there was, in fact, a UFO. So naturally, there was a lot of speculation about it and a lot of questions. Was it some new enemy, an old enemy, some foe that we really had not counted on coming through at this point? People were naturally curious, and reporters covered it pretty thoroughly. The Army Air Corps, which was responsible for that particular area near Roswell, produced a press release, and well, here's the story from theweek.com. In short, it was essentially a weather balloon. That's it. The news around it died down shortly after that, and that was pretty much it. Everyone was satisfied that it was explained away. So how did it become a conspiracy? The thing you need to know is that in the 1970s, before we had the internet and social media to spread conspiracies, you had your crazy uncle and tabloid magazines. Those are the magazines that you still see at the checkout registers in your local supermarkets. They often have some salacious headlines, giant photos, and the stories tend to promote some wild conspiracy theory. But in the 1970s, they sold well because they were a form of entertainment and people were looking for something. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have a lot of TV coverage because TV went off the air at some point in the evening. You didn't have all these ways to communicate with people, so you'd talk to your neighbors, your friends, your classmates if you were in school, and you'd learn some things. So once in a while the newspapers provided some good headlines and real reporting, sometimes you would see something that would catch your attention on these tabloids that was worth reading. And if you kept a skeptical mind, you went, okay, that's fine. It's just for fun. This is just entertainment. It's all good stuff. There may be a nugget or kernel of truth to it, but it's really not anything more than just entertainment. Now, to put it in perspective, there's a story I like to tell, and it has to do with Burt Reynolds in the 1980s. There was a salacious headline that one of the tabloids had put together about Burt, and I think about Lonnie Anderson, and it was just salacious and it was not correct, and Burt was very upset about it. Now, Burt owned a horse farm that wasn't too far away from where the headquarters was for this tabloid. So he actually got all the horse manure he could collect from his horse farm, put it into a giant net, basically, and then hired a helicopter to take it over and dump it onto the headquarters to really tell them what he thought about them. Just to put it in perspective, that's one way that one person dealt with the tabloids and dealt with some of the stories that came out about him specifically. But back to the Roswell story. One of the tabloids, it's the same one that Burt Reynolds had gone after, picked up the story in 1975 with out any sort of specific details. They didn't note any of the corrections, additions, anything that the Army Air Corps said. They just published it as a cover-up. They used the original story and then just said, oh, there's a cover-up going along with it. And thus began the story of aliens in Area 51. With not a shred of truth to it, but it was a juicy story, so it grew legs and is still repeated today, 50 years later. It's amazing how well this caught on. For those of us who are rational and think about things, this should serve as a gentle reminder of how easily the media, be it big or social, can manipulate people into believing they're somehow being lied to, and concoct some absurd story that becomes facts in a way. So then the question for us becomes, what can we do to combat these conspiracy theories? Well, there's a couple of things. Well, the first thing is we can encourage debate. When someone presents something to you, you can listen and then ask questions about it and debate them on it a little bit to start to get the discussion rolling and get some understanding happening. You should always use a variety of sources. Don't just use the one social media post or the thing your crazy uncle told you that gets blown back many times again and gets told over and over again. Think about different sources that you can go to look for information. You can show a little empathy. Sometimes people get duped and brought into things that maybe they don't really understand completely, and they think that they can debunk 1,000 years worth of science with a 5-minute sort of video that shows X. It doesn't really work that way. You can say, hey, I want to show you some empathy and understand what you're saying, but I don't agree with you. And one of the most important things is to focus on the facts. Make sure that you're staying fact-based. They're going to use some wild things about some cabal or something that's happening, and you can focus on the facts and tell them, hey, this, and this. I know the Earth is round because we can see it. From space, when we're up there, we can see the curvature of the Earth. And the last thing is, don't push the individual who's giving you the conspiracy theory. They need to be brought around to it thoughtfully. You need to have a discussion to get them to the point of understanding. You may or may not get there. Look, I've known a lot of people in my life who had a conspiracy theory that they hung on to no matter what. They weren't going to give it up. And that's okay. I understand that. But you have to be thoughtful in the way you approach them because you know that they're not going to change their mind. But sometimes they're willing to listen a little bit if you can give them a couple of facts or a couple of things where you can show them sources and show empathy toward them, and you can be thoughtful and help direct them back. Look, I'll agree. Sometimes things feel like giant conspiracies. When you look at the JFK assassination, for example, I've studied that a lot, and I can see why there might be the conspiratorial sort of evidence that suggests that maybe this was something that happened. But when you stop and think about it, who would have been behind it? How would they have gotten away with it? How would this have happened? It just doesn't make sense. Yes, the Warren Commission came together and came up with sort of a synopsis that doesn't necessarily make sense, but it makes enough sense, given the circumstances, that that's probably what happened. And conspiracy theories don't get us anywhere in that case. It doesn't change anything. He was still assassinated in 1963. Or someone might talk about the moon landing being fake. And honestly, with the technology that would have been required in the 1960s to fake something, it would have been much more complex than actually getting us to the moon. And I've known some astronauts over the years, and I've known people who were working in the space agency at the time of the moon landing, and I can tell you for a fact that it was not fake. But people still want to believe that. But the number of people that would have been required, maybe hundreds or thousands of people to keep that secret and keep the conspiracy going, that just doesn't make sense to me. Again, it fails the logic test. I put it to my nose and it doesn't smell so rosy. So there you go. That's the story of conspiracies and conspiracy theories, and I hope I've helped you to just think about things a little more logically. And that is my show for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it, and remember, if we can dream it, we can always do it.
What's your point, David?